AI systems are different. They learn, they evolve, they behave probabilistically. Testing them requires a new level of expertise. The ISTQB Certified Tester. AI testing certification focuses exclusively on validating AI-based systems, from data quality and model behavior to bias, robustness, and lifecycle risks. Structured around the machine learning lifecycle, CTAI equips professionals to assess trust, reliability, and safety in AI solutions. As AI adoption accelerates, quality assurance must evolve with it. For those ready to test beyond traditional software, AI testing begins here. Discover the ISTQB CTAI certification.
Hello and welcome to another session on this year's A4Q Summit. I'm very happy to have with me one of my favorite people, Sebastian Małyska. Hello, Sebastian.
Hey, Devi.
Sebastian, I'm going to give you a little intro, but then I know you'll tell everybody about yourself. So I know from a lot of the work that we do together that you're ISTQB Secretary, member of the ISTQB Executive, the Polish Quality Board President. You're an engineer in test in IBM, Smart Coders, and Medina.io. Thank you for being here, Sebastian. There we go. Sebastian, I know I'm looking forward to this presentation. I'm sure that it's going to really appeal to a lot of people tuning in today. And notice when you strap lines, you say for a quality expert, testing the API is no longer a one-size-fits-all task. So a lot of good information going to be imparted, no doubt. I'm going to get off stage, but before I go, just want to remind people that they can vote for best presentation. So listen carefully. At the end of this presentation, watch out for the QR code and people can go vote for Seba. I'll remind you at the end. We will have some questions. So we'll get to those, hopefully, Seba, in about 30 minutes time. And so everybody sit back and enjoy this presentation from Sebastian.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me. And since we have only 30 minutes, let's speed up. So I would like to talk today with you about communications, but the communication from the technical perspective. So let's talk about the protocols. A few words about me, but the most important thing you already heard from Debbie. And if I need to add only one sentence, I guess I would say that I enjoy talking about the QA almost as much as reporting the other people's bugs. This is kind of joke, like we all know that it's not about the reporting bugs, but it's always nice to find something interesting in our job. Okay, inspiration. So I cannot start with those talk, not give a gratitude to David, which inspired me. Based on his presentation, I start and figure out about my topics. This is not always easy to share with you what is inside, what we're thinking about it from technical perspective. So let's come back. Why? So first of all, listening to David's presentation, I realized that I work in an organization which we can say that call it API first development. And so this is the organization that first of all, we, in terms of the working on the new feature, we first of all deliver the API. Then on the top of that, we're implementing other stuff. So usually this is kind of front end. And what is most interesting, this is not only the perspective of my organization, but there's much other organization which is working that way. And thanks to David's presentation, I learned that there's conducting a big survey. I mean that over 5,000 companies are being part of the survey when the outcome is reported, and it's called State of API report. So this is quite interesting, the source of the knowledge, what is happening in the industry, what's the trend, and what you should look for. And what it struggled me at first when I start thinking about, okay, what we can talk about, what is the important from the engineer in the nowadays. I think that that API that we always treat like yet another interface or yet another stage in our process life cycle can be product itself. So what if you realize that and start thinking like, okay, I in the process of delivering the new feature, I usually have to deliver in the backend, front end, and then is new feature end-to-end testing, acceptance testing. When you start thinking that, okay, in the time when we need to shift much quicker, the way or the method that we start delivering is the backend only, so API only. It's and this is good valid product which deliver the business value. We start thinking, okay, so maybe something changed. Maybe this is not only reserved to engineers only, but we should look from different angle on something that we're doing by the last many years. But let's come back to our report. So first of all, we would like to be on time, and we would like to be know what is happening in the engineering. We would like to, first of all, not be replaceable. So we would like to give the value to our organization. So giving a value from the engineer point of view, it means that I need to know certain basics, including the protocols that the software architecture it's nowadays used. So let's look for report about 2024. If I consider myself an engineer, I think that at least, let's say, top 5 protocols, I should be aware of that. Maybe I don't need to be expert in all of them, but definitely I need to recognize and know at least highlights about that. And in that report, we see that we have those 5. Okay, it was some of day we can say that this 2024, this is not valid anymore. Gen Z generation say that this cap, this is not true. Okay, so let's see about 2025. 2026 is not yet published, so this is the latest information what we have. And we still have more or less the same top 5 protocols, but ordering a little bit change, which also tells us something about the architecture, about the market out there. So first of all, if we need to know at least one protocol, which we would like to be familiar with and I don't know, have expertise, I guess definitely the REST is the king. The REST is always on the top, and they used to be, and this is still there. What was changed from 2024 to 2025? The SOAP protocol. So the protocol that we thought that it will be always with us, it's dropping. It is from the 2nd position or the 3rd position. It's going to the down. And what's replaced him? WebSockets. So maybe this good moment to still think, okay, I should need to know or read a little bit about that kind of the protocols. But next to also the popularity, I guess there's the report gives us a top 5 outcomes. What was that revealed through this report? And I will not tell you all those 5, at least not right now. But let's start with only 2 of them. Rest of them you will learn later when we will come back to our the let's say elephant in the room. So first of all, what report prove it or just confirm what we might think is that that for 65% of organization, API is good enough product. And again, if you think about that, so let's imagine the application which is not the typical CMS, like there's a backend, there's front end, or any other presentation layer. But let's start thinking, okay, we need to deliver some kind of application which is maybe even serverless, which consume the content from very different APIs, doing some kind of processing of this data and giving that kind of service or giving that kind of data to our customers. And then we very quickly realized that that kind of application already there. And if we're just thinking like, is it important, for example, that Netflix has the website? Probably not so much important, but what is important for that kind of services or Spotify, the stream must be there and must be online. So if you start thinking that way, that the communication, the API level, is the critical, and this is the real the product, this is totally new perspective. At least it was for me when I start analyzing this report. This is the top, let's say the top 3 point. If we go further, we also find something which is, of course, the problem, of course, maybe not problem, but challenge, of course, and the communication. There's always that kind of situation like how well or bad or not do very well we communicate inside the team or between the teams. This is always have the influence on the software that we're delivering. And this is also proof that you can imagine that through all the organization that took part in the survey, 93 of the teams struggle with the API collaboration. So still very similar thing like just implementing or just be sure that the certain client require and certain server deliver. It's still a big problem or challenge to have that kind of contract between those two entities. And what is also funny, like if we have that kind of situation on the coding level, simple code review, which help us to not, let's say, duplicate the components inside of the method between the two classes. But when both developers are looking on the code, then they realize that that kind of code already exists. So simple issue that we can address on the on the teams level, when we are on the between teams cooperation, now we have the problems. And it's not a very very rare situation. Like the same kind of functionality is being delivered by different API endpoints. And why? Because the team didn't discuss, but because there was a lack of architect, there was still communication problems. So this is probably not surprise to us, but as for me, this is really important that just to realize that there is still challenges on that level. What else? We will be discussing today about the protocols, and I would like to start all our discussion from really big pictures. And really big pictures, it's like kind of classification. So how to start? There are many protocols on the market. How to start and explain what are the group, subgroup, how to cluster them. And if you look on the picture, for example, and we start from the kingdom of API, there are two paths. One of them is request response, so kind of synchronization communication. And in that way, we'll find the protocols like SOAP, like REST, RCP, and GraphQL. So this is usually the protocols like there's request, there's response. I need something, server give me something that I ask. Looks very simple. But there's also the second part, event-driven. Like very often, especially with the modern system, we have the situation like we're just waiting for certain, event or certain situation. And then in that kind of situation, we have the protocols like webhooks, WebSockets, or HTTP streams. So there's, plenty of options for everyone. Let's start from the, our king. So let's rest a little bit. Now you can rest. And I will be talking. Okay, this is very simple. Probably you already you're familiar with that, but just to just a quick revise. Like there's bidirectional protocol, request response. So in the simple case, we have the client which gets something. So we would like to collect some kind of information through going through certain address and asking the server sending back information to us. Also with the kind of response, response in here 200, okay? But there's usually request response and the code of that response. This is very simple protocol. In terms of the format, usually in the request we have JSON. But in the response, we can expect anything. So we see that it's very flexible. So this is not like we have to expect certain type, but even the payload, it's something that, or the response is something that we can specify, depends on our organization. What is important, and the most important element in this protocol, is the method. Method is the king here. The method defines the behavior. So through the method, we'll know what we would like to achieve. But before the method, let's start discussing about the, that target, the URL, that what we would like to, what kind of endpoint we would like to talk with. So let's start with simple decoding. Again, probably you already know that, but just a simple repeat. So usually we're starting with the protocol, then we have kind of domain, our tool domain, something like this. Then we have, part responsible. This will be endpoint, this is public, private, API. Usually we have the version and resource endpoint. So this is the element that the endpoint that we will be discussing or will be interacting with. After that, we have the parameters, and the length of the parameters can be many. Of course, then we see that everything goes in the request. This is one of the version, but this is the only one, the valid one? No, it's not. Different organization might have some different structure, different syntax of this URL, and this is also fine. For example, this is the organization that I'm working with. When you can think that, okay, API, it is certain version, but also in our organization, our architect make a decision that, okay, we need more information. That simple API is not enough, but we would like to have one of the parameters also the API version. And this is totally fine in our case, and totally fine from the protocol perspective. So if we know where to address and how to pass the argument and which endpoint we're talking, so let's see what else we can, specify in this protocol. Definitely we can specify the method. So method is something like if we know the address, then the method say that what we would like to do with this, whether we would like to get some information or we would like to deliver some information or that kind of others. So again, there's many methods, probably you saw many of them already. Later we'll focus on, let's say, top 4, but also it's important to mention that next to the get, post, and patch, there's also method like trace, head option, the connect, especially connect, we'll be talking about this, but there's also other method, and as much you're diving in the, the microservices world, as much you are getting familiar with all those methods. So in the really nutshell, top 4 methods. So usually in terms of the requesting something, so collecting information, we're sending the request, and the body of this request usually is empty, and this is happening with the get. And usually we would like to delete something. This is also, the body, because we don't deliver anything. We just, sending information, please delete it. If we would like to post some information, so kind of add information or replace something which is already there, of course we need to deliver that kind of information. So this is about the request, response. Usually in all those options we get kind of body, not empty body. In terms of the whether this is safe method or not, we can say that get is the most safe method, because this only gives the information, have no influence, not changing. It's really hard to make harm to system. But again, this is kind of assumption in the situation like we have some kind of common understanding which is considered in the internet. If your organization, your architect figure out, like, for example, we need get method which do something additional next to the fetching information, but for example, let's imagine deleting some kind of object. This is also possible because the protocol is allowed. Well, it's really hard to say about the protocol in terms of the rest, but this is also possible, and this is the trick and something that you need to remember, that if everything is possible, it's not it's not banned. In that kind of framework of communication, it's still possible, even that we hear marked in like 90%, yet it's safe. And very difficult word, idempotent. Usually we say that the get, put, delete is idempotent because they not, if we send more than twice that kind of the same request, the state of the system is not changing. Post usually it's considered like something like this. Every post, publishing something and building some kind of queue of the messages. Anyway, this is the information what we'd like to have. There's also status codes from 100 to 500. There are many of them. It's great fun to go into, to, let's say, Wikipedia and reading all those stuff, because then you might be surprised how many response codes. But again, in this protocol, we believe what is returned back, because this is give us information. So if you would like to close the REST protocol, so what are my experience and the important said word to remind you about that. So usually we're starting with single REST server, but very often we have, okay, since we already know, so let's create the second, the third one, let's do some kind of integration. And very quickly from the kind of monolith application, we're going to kind of microservice. A few years ago, microservice was kind of hype, like all the products should be microservice. But then we encounter some kind of challenges on the integration level, how the testers can integrate and say that each services are talking to each other. And kind of solution for that is contract testing. We can say someday in the future more about the contract testing. As for now, please remember to write it down in Google after my presentation. What else we can say about this protocol? We already know that the JSON, it's usually the payload. So let's try a little bit with change something in this JSON and see how much fault tolerance protocol. You will be surprised. Ask one, get all. So this is typical, let's say, issue or pitfall in that kind of protocol. If we collecting information about certain object, we're just collecting everything. Even that, for example, we have the object with 20 entries and we're just interested about one entry, let's say name of this, or just address. We cannot in this protocol say that give me only address. We by using get, we're just fetching all the information. So we see that a little bit overhead. Like if we'd like to be optimized and much clever in this protocol, we don't have that kind of functionality. So there's a lot of data being transferred back to the client, even though the client don't care. Documentation, Swagger, OpenAPI. If you're already familiar with that kind of stuff, it's documentation, it's okay. If you're not very familiar, it might be not easy to start with understanding what is happening, what is the happy flow, just by seeing this documentation. And something which is the most important in that kind of protocol, just to understand, like calling REST the protocol, it's not the best idea. Even the author of this, Roy Fielding, call it rather architectural style. And this has a big meaning in terms of that we have very flexible solution, very nice, we can do whatever, we can adjust to our system. But again, this is not a protocol per se. We cannot depend on certain elements, especially if we are open to third-party vendors. So again, flexibility over the control and over the resilience of the protocol. If we're talking about resilience, so we like this. Okay, from our protocol, from the top 5, we know that this was very high protocol, but getting less and less on the top of the list. But still, there are many experts getting familiar with this protocol. I guess this is because, for example, in each situation that we have, need to have situation like the request needs to be validated. We need to be resilient with the request. We need to be able to very quickly validate what we get. Is it okay, or just someone is just trying mess with us or doing some kind of malicious thing. The SOAP is very useful because it's protocol itself. It has real documented structure, and we have very quickly able to validate with everything that we get. It's something that we should expect. But let's go to details. So again, bidirectional request response. What is interesting and different than the rest, here we have the method post, and when we usually got 200 OK response. So not as many as for the rest, but only single one. What is very different from the rest, from the very first view, is that we are not having the JSON. Here we have the XML. So either in the request, in the response, we have the XML. So for example, if we just would like to specify that, give me information about the robot Irek, so we see how much text we need to put there in order to get that kind of information. But what we also get, we got exact information, so where the name is starting, when the field is ending, everything which is very strictly precisely described. Even this protocol you have document WSDL, which is the kind of syntax. So we can usually, before processing the request, you can check that whether the request was according to syntax. So this is very, very nice protocol. There's still some kind of tool that you can use for testing. SOAP UI, but it is less and less popular. Let's go to next one. Next one, GraphQL, is supposed to be big change. Why? Let's say that we have very similar thing, like to both of the protocols. Again, we have the post request, this request response, so 2-directional, and we have JSON. Plus, we have some advantage. If you remember in the rest, when you just get request, for example, for the robot named Irek, we just got all information about Irek. Here we can specify. You can say that I would like to know only about ID, name, and the weight of this robot, and only those informations being returned back. So this is, you see that certain optimization in terms of the REST. So that's why it's supposed to be some kind of protocol that should replace REST, at least in the time when it was presented. Until now, it's not as it used to be. Still, REST is the king. But I think that many products are implementing this. But again, we are rather shifting to event-driven. So, and here we still have request response. So this have some kind of circumstances. And what else is interesting? So, for example, even the client is talking with server GraphQL in the GraphQL format. Usually behind our server, we have still the legacy REST interfaces. So, for example, we can send some kind of request which require more than one REST information. So usually in the GraphQL server, we're just collecting all those information. So sending many requests through the REST and having all the information, then the server is collecting, preparing a response and send it back. So we see that kind of proxy protocol implementation. But what else should be the leverage in this protocol? Definitely the query. We already started about the query that is collecting data read only, but we can specify. What else? There's mutation. So first time, I guess, we have the situation not like REST, we just collect information, but we can just collect the dedicated information that we requested and even start modified or pre-process that kind of data, which allow the client to digest much better. So this is yet another functionality that was not in the previous protocol. And there is subscription. Subscription, we'll come back to that, but this is really interesting. If there is one thing that you need to remember about the GraphQL, it's that kind of picture. So usually we have request to the post, there's 200 response OK. in the rest word mean, okay, request was processed very good. There was some, content that we really would like to get. But in the GraphQL, then we opening what is in the payload, and in the payload was error. Sometimes, or more than in the more times that we would like to wish, that kind of situation happening, sadly. Okay. Event-driven WebSockets. So the question, whether you see any time when we have the response like 101. If not, then probably you haven't worked with the WebSocket. So WebSocket is a very simple protocol optimized for exchanging information. So again, before that, we just need to, every time when we need to get some kind of information, we need to send a request, and then we got response, request, response. And you see that this is a huge overhead. Why I need to constantly asking someone, give me some kind of information? Why I cannot send one request and then just got information as soon as they will be, ready to send it to me? And the WebSocket was the response for that kind of need. That the engineers realized that, okay, I just need to send one GET request, just inform my both endpoint, okay, I'm ready to, to process. You should be ready to send me the information. And then they switching back to bidirectional messages, and they just payloads are being exchanged. And what is nice, the payload, it could be even DEX, UTF-8, but also could be binary. So we see that big move in the optimization way. So this is something that, just reduce overhead of the, communication and other stuff, just focus on give me the data. And if you're thinking whether I have any experience with the WebSocket, maybe you haven't have in your product, but do you know the tool called Playwright? Maybe, probably yes, because it's very popular in the front-end automation. Look how the Playwright, the client, is communicating with the server. It's not like in the Selenium, REST protocol. This is exactly WebSocket is happening there. That's why it's much more, quicker, at least from our perspective. Okay, about the operation. Do you remember our subscription from GraphQL? Here we have the subscription. This is exactly WebSockets. So this is not totally new concept, but this is something that was already, considered and introduced in the GraphQL protocol. Okay, webhooks. Webhooks, it's called usually the send and forget. So we have the situation like in many, current application, we subscribe some kind of event. And if the event occur, then the server remember, okay, this client waited for that. So I will just send the information about that. And it can be send information in the JSON, the XML payload. So this is, I guess, again, very much optimized in terms of I don't need to remind myself to the server. Maybe you have some information to me now, okay, then in the next hour. We know that, again, this is overhead. And we also don't need to keep the live connection like you do WebSockets. Just keep the connection, even there's no data, sending, keep alive between those two endpoints. In this solution, we know that when the event occur, for example, if anything happen, then definitely I will be informed about that. Okay, and now we're thinking that probably we have all the variation optimization of the protocol. So is that an AI change something? Is that something that could change? Because we have many variation. And I have bad news for you. Unfortunately, yes. With the AI, we get at least one more protocol. We got MCP protocol. So, of course, this is idea like before MCP, we have many, cables, interconnected, big mesh about that. With the ACP, we have, clean and nice solution. Of course, we know that's not the truth, but this is kind of, vision of the, architects. That's why it's also that probably you heard many times about the MCP and you heard that this is like USB for a computer. I don't like this comparison, but it tells something. So if we just focus on the AI, or rather call it from more engineering perspective, if we say that we have very clever LLM, those LLMs always close in some kind of black box. So even the easiest, the smartest guy, if this is still kind of in the cage or in the prison, his ability is very limited. So we can imagine that MCP, it's a kind of like he got kind of hands, he have ability to go out and just got kind of information that start consuming, start interacting with the outside world. So that's why MCP, change everything in terms of the LLM. And since that LLM cannot, figure out, or hallucinate kind of answer, but LLM can start fetching the data, processing, and give you the right answer, which LLM trying to always do. But let's go quickly back to our report, the state of API states. So this also was something that was recognized in the report 2025. That, for example, the first item that was recorded there is that 89% of developers use AI, but only 24% design API for the agent. So again, imagine that you are, as a consumer, getting familiar with the AI, we're using technology, but also we are not realize that, okay, my API that we know that's already, good product that can be delivered, it's not, it don't have to be, optimized for me, for a human being, but there's also other, stakeholders that will be consuming that kind of information. For example, AI agents. And only 24% of that kind of, designers realize about that. What else? We also know the security. We also starting with fun of new technology, but we're forgetting about that. What kind of access we might have? There's a big topic. Let's keep it for now. Third point we just already discussed. So what was the fourth point in this top 5, discovery? So that the most important thing is that the MCP is emerging in a connective layer between the agent and API machine discover. So even that 70% of developers are aware of MCP, only 10% using this regularly. It's going to grow, blah, blah, blah. So we know that, okay, but this is, adaptation problem. Even that we know there's new technology, there's new way of communication, we need to more time to just learn how to use it. And this is exactly happening right now. Maybe in the developers world, but in the testing world, the same. So if we would like to conclude and close this, the top 5 findings through this report, I guess, and next to realizing that API is in a product that we need to deliver, or we might deliver without the front end, without, nice, facade. We also need to realize that, okay, people used to consume the data from the API, but this is not what is happening now. Right now, the agentic world started consuming our API data. And who is responsible for designing? I guess we as a team. So let's ask yourself a question like, in the next time when you will be part of the designing API, start asking your, architect, who is the stakeholders, who will be consuming, whether we should not optimize our API to be consumed by the, agents instead of the people. Maybe this is the right time because we know the tokens are cost. So again, if we optimize something, there will be less token, less money. We will be winning. But again, very simple, come back to MCP. So again, MCP is open protocol that interconnect LLM with the external data. We know that we are building AI-powered ID, enhancing the chat interface, or creating custom AI workflows. So MCP provides standards ways to connect LLM with the context they need. So again, we have the agentic world, we have kind of context, and so we have the data which those LLM needs. So MCP is kind of gateway and allowing to interact. You can find on the GitHub that kind of page, which explains there's SDK just to take and use. There are many things. What is important that MCP protocol, we can say that okay, MCP AI host, it's a client and the server. We talking about two layers, data layers and the transport layers. Okay, this is maybe not so nice looking perspective, nice looking picture. So let me switch to this, much better. And we can say that we have two layers. So on the lower layer, we have the transport layer, when we could have either local or remote. So we see that we can communicate with the MCP server through the local, so simple, pipeline in the Linux environment like echo something pipe MCP server, or we can of course use HTTP protocol with the authentication, all those stuff. And we have data layers, so we have the certain format like we expecting and the server is expecting. In terms of the JSON MCP, we are expecting JSON RPC, preferred is to 0. So we have one of the protocols that we already discussed, remote proceed protocol, and based on the JSON. In terms of the MCP, we need to talk about 3 primitives, so not going too much dive, but we need to understand that this is protocol, and as a protocol has a definition. In the definition, it say that we might expect there 3 primitives. One of them is, for example, resources. So again, our LLM need to consume some kind of data, so resources usually will be delivering that kind of data. So it could be, just content of the file, it will be access to database, it could be some kind of stream. There are prompts. Prompts will tell, additional information to LLM how to process that kind of data, and the tools. So for example, we get some kind of, features or actions that already implemented, and we just ask, through the LLM can ask, do something for me. What does it mean in the practice? Before that, I mentioned that this is very easy to implement. So here on the left, you have very easy, Python implementation. When through decorators, we can just have the, definition like one of the primitives. This will be the tool. This will be resource. This will be, prompt. So very simple method. Just, call it via decorator. This looks like this. And if you don't remember, and this is example of how JSON RPC protocol looks like. So again, we have the simple JSON, and we say that, okay, this is protocol to the 0. Usually we have method that we call it the method, and the name of the method we would like to, call. Then the method usually is taking some kind of argument. So we're saying, okay, this method take 2 arguments, and the ID is 1. And for example, we can take that kind of JSON and put echo, that kind of message pipe, and go to send it exactly to Python server, so that kind of server, and start doing some kind of testing. So as you see, starting is very easy. Like you just need to have server, some kind of terminal, and you just start talking to MCP server. How it's working in practice? So let's say a very easy case, like we would like to check the weather. Simple thing, right? But again, LLM itself won't have that kind of knowledge. It will be the cleverest LLM, but he cannot guess what kind of weather will be tomorrow in Bydgoszcz, in Poland, in Mauritius, or in Tokyo. And so that's why he needs MCP. So for example, how looks the communication? So first of all, we have the client. So on the MCP client is sending initialize and saying, okay, I would like to talk with the weather bot via protocol 1.0. In the response, the MCP serving, okay, I'm here, one protocol, also give that kind of session ID. So they started discussing, but still LLM know nothing about what the MCP server is offering to him. Then, for example, LLM is asking, okay, give me the list of the tools. Do you remember one of the primitives? This is the tools. So we have standardized, method that it's supposed to be implemented. If there is no, then the second part would say, okay, there's nothing, but usually there are some kind of method. And here we have, okay, I'm the MCP server. I have 2 methods. I have 2 implemented methods. One of my methods is get forecast. The second is get alert. And there's short description and parameters. So also this give that kind of context to LLM, what I can do, what kind of serve to you. And for example, we have our case, I would like to know the weather. So probably I would need to call method get forecast for some certain point, but still LLM don't know how to interact with this. So again, ask additional standard request, describe the tool and the name of the tool. And in that case, the MCP server responding and giving all the information that LLM need just to call it in the proper way, according to syntax, giving the all information what is needed. So again, telling you that this method will give you that kind of information. In order to call me, we need to give me the latitude and longitude. Both arguments are required and require a float type of the input. Then I will return you array of the forecast object. So this is, we see that self-explaining information to the LLM. How can you talk with me? This is my protocol. So what is happening? Then LLM is calling, okay, then here I need to forecast for gathered kind of geographic location, and the result, this is the results and the weather, the forecast for this geographic location, and then protocol, terminate the session. So you see that we have, now we can go to our chat and ask, give me the weather for my location for tomorrow. And this is how it's happening. If you have more time, probably you can just open your, let's say, Visual Studio Code, go to our chat, and I recommend to go to show agent debug log, which exactly showing you that kind of situation. Here, for example, I ask, what is the weather in Tokyo right now? And very quickly we can just go back and check that. But first of all, it was just explaining what kind of function I have. Do you have any function which match the information that I needed? Then tool find it, and that weather and geocode search, and the argument was Tokyo, because I asked about the Tokyo. So the first, what the LLM did, just decode the name of the Tokyo to geographic location, give me 5 location. First of them was used in the next call. Again, everything was happening through the LLM without, we just asked one question, which was a tool call, give the latitude, longitude, and give me the temperature, and the response that we got from MCP was presented to the user. So again, I ask, what is the weather in Tokyo right now? I got the answer, that is the weather. And this is the repeating model. So whatever you're gonna ask, when you will be working with the MCP server, it will gonna look like this. So user will gonna ask something, MCP will proceed, will learn how to use it. Maybe it's called some kind of external API, using some other protocols. We'll come back, we'll get back some kind of information, and those information will be presented to end user. It's difficult? Rather not. Again, but what is telling us about the current situation? What is telling us about our challenges? So definitely, having one agent, it's easy and nice, but what we start thinking and start realizing that we start having the agent mesh. So again, we have many agents that will be doing many things to us. So orchestration of this will be a big challenge, but allow us to create a more complicated workflows. This is not the only protocol, of course, that was created. And we can say that this additional protocol, agent to agent, which has been created just to talk between the two LLMs or two servers. We are not focused right now. I just want to let you know that there's other protocols. But concluding my presentation, we are next to let's say legacy protocols, which still heavily used. We have new challenges as a QA. So in the old world, our testing strategy was very focused on the testing static endpoints. We just guessing what kind of payload, what kind of request you can put, whether in process enough, whether we can make harm to our server by injecting something. This was kind of trouble, and then our challenges. And we believe usually with the HTTP call to responses. So the code was something that tells us. So again, we need to understand, and the machine give us 200, 300, 500, and this was interpreted by us. In the new agentic world, Next, on the top of what we have, because somebody needs to test the protocols, there are other stuff. We need to be aware about the context boundaries. We need to know how much information in the context it's enough to call, for example, our protocol, to call our MCP server. Is it good enough or not? Or whether is that LLM is working fine if there is all information in the context and he's still not calling the MCP. He's not still able to recognize that I have those information, but this information is not being, identified like, deliverable. What else? Validating autonomous test discovery. So again, even that MCP or A2A gives some kind of business card to our LLM model and saying that, okay, I can do that. Just call me and give me that kind of answer. And we need to also, probably as a testers, need to be aware that, okay, someone need to test. Is that business card is enough? Why our business card is working with this model and not working with this model? Maybe there is some, inconsistency. Maybe something is missing. Totally new way of, self-building the mesh of the self-recognize the agent. And of course, security. So we know that, again, authorization, end-to-end, we all, like to see that everything is interconnecting, but there's always question that if the two bots are interconnected, is it good or bad? Is that one bot can give all the information to the other one, or maybe there is some information that should not reveal. So there's huge challenge in terms of that word. So just concluding my presentation, I guess, thank you. And this is the time for your questions, if there is any questions.
Thank you, Seba. There's lots of stuff in there. I'll just remind the audience that we will actually have the recordings available for people to dip back into and to pick up on some of the great stuff in there. We're going to try to take a couple of questions. So let's see what we've got. I'm the QA manager in the background, and we have problems with our third-party vendors. How can we be sure that our API will be working with delivered by them clients? So okay. Vendor, clients, QA manager in the background. Yeah, you get it.
I believe this is even that we, discussing about the AI, the old protocols, old legacy protocols will be still with us. And those 5 points that was revealed by this report still showing that the problems or challenges that we used to have are there. Here, I guess the question is, again, interconnection between the different APIs, the consumer and the provider, whether they are ready to interact and exchange the information. And this was always kind of challenge. As many services we have, this will be the bigger challenge. And I guess that if I need to answer quickly for that, I would say that the contract testing, I guess this is one of the the techniques that helping a lot. Then when we can create the mock of the of the one side and give the other side and test, say that, hey, just need to do unit test about the mock, and whenever we will be ready, then we start to intercommunicate. And I expect that kind of problem will be still with us. So some of the problem will be context driven, AI driven, but there's still on the technical level we should have that kind of problems or challenges with the interconnection to third parties, plus of course communication between the engineers, which is always
always communication. Seba, I think we're at the top of the hour just about there, so I'm not sure we've got time for any more questions, but just a huge thank you to you. Kenza, can we have that little QR code thing at the top of the page, please, if possible? There we go. We will always have the vote for the best presentation. Go to the QR code and you'll find Seba's profile on there.
Vote for me. I will be
Oh, Sebastian, lots of really great information in there. I think people will value going through it again and listening again to what you shared. Thank you so much. And to everybody, stay tuned. We've got a couple more sessions today. Don't miss them. And thank you for joining us for the A4Q Testing Summit 2026.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you as well.
AI systems are different. They learn, they evolve, they behave probabilistically. Testing them requires a new level of expertise. The ISTQB Certified Tester. AI testing certification focuses exclusively on validating AI-based systems, from data quality and model behavior to bias, robustness, and lifecycle risks. Structured around the machine learning lifecycle, CTAI equips professionals to assess trust, reliability, and safety in AI solutions. As AI adoption accelerates, quality assurance must evolve with it. For those ready to test beyond traditional software, AI testing begins here. Discover the ISTQB CTAI certification.